Hello everyone! Today we will discuss Chapter 2, Nature and Effects of Obligations. But before we go on with our new lesson, let us first have a review of what we have discussed in the previous weeks. We have discussed Article 1156, which talks about the meaning of obligation. What is an obligation? An obligation is a juridical necessity to give, to do, or not to do. If until now you still do not understand what an obligation is, just go back to our previous lesson and you listen to it over and over again. I have also discussed to you who is a creditor. And a creditor may sometimes be called an obligee. I have also discussed who is a debtor, and the debtor is sometimes called the obligor. If you get confused, who is an obligee or who is an obligor, always remember this. C and double E, D and OR. So when I speak of obligee, always remember C. C from creditor, double E from obligee. When I speak of debtor, always remember D from debtor and OR from obligor or door. We have also discussed the different essential requisites of an obligation. What then are the requisites of an obligation? We have the creditor, the debtor, the object or the subject matter, and the juridical tie. Remember that absence of one of these essential elements, there is no obligation to speak of. So kung debtor lang ang andon, object or subject matter and the juridical tie, kung walang creditor, there will be no obligation. What if there is a creditor and there is no debtor pero wala ka namang object or subject matter, there is no obligation to speak of. Meron kang ang creditor, meron kang debtor, meron kang object pero walang juridical tie, wala pa ring obligation. The creditor, debtor, object or the subject matter and the juridical tie must be present. What then is a creditor? Who is a debtor? What is an object or the subject matter, and what do we mean when we say juridical tie? The creditor is an active subject while the debtor is a passive subject. The creditor is the person who is entitled to demand the fulfillment of the obligation, while si debtor is the person who is bound to the fulfillment of the obligation. So kung ikaw si creditor, ikaw ang nagpautang, si debtor ang nangutang, who has the right to demand, kinsa man ang pwede maingon nga, huy, bayari ko, that is the creditor. Pag mo demand si creditor, kinsa ang mubayad? Si debtor, because the debtor is bound to the fulfillment of the obligation. In other words, si creditor has the right to demand and the debtor has the duty to fulfill. Object or subject matter of the obligation, what is this? So for example, si creditor nagpautang og kwarta didto kang debtor. What is our object or subject matter? The money itself. So, object or subject matter is the conduct required to be observed by the debtor, or without the prestation, there is nothing to perform. So, the conduct required to be observed by the debtor, kung nangutang siya og kwarta kang creditor, is the conduct to pay the loan. Without the prestation, there is nothing to perform. So kung walay object o walay subject matter, wala kay dapat ihatag. And when we say performance, it can mean giving a thing, doing a certain act, or not doing a certain act. Next is a juridical tie. This is also called efficient cause. So for example, si creditor nagpautang dito kang debtor, si creditor has a right to demand. Si debtor pod has a duty to fulfill. Masking pag na-creditor o na-debtor, kung wala kay object or subject matter, wala ka naman palang inutang, therefore walang obligation. Pero kapag meron kang inutang, therefore meron ka ring juridical tie. Juridical tie is that which binds or connect the parties to the obligation. What is now your juridical tie? Your contract of loan. In Article 1157, we also discussed the sources of obligations, and we mean that obligations arise from law, contracts, quasi-contracts, acts or omissions punished by law, and quasi-delicts. So alam natin what is a law, alam natin ano ang contract. Laws and contracts are sources of obligation. Pero meron ding quasi-contracts. Remember in our example, so for example, si A naglakaw, nahulog iyang 1,000 ang nakapunit si B. Quasi-contracts are obligations which arise from lawful, voluntary, and unilateral acts which are enforceable to the end that no one shall be unjustly enriched or benefited at the expense of another. So for example, again, si A nahulugan og 1,000 na punit ni B. Wala may gingon sa law nga ibalik na kay dili na imuha. That is natural law. But because we have quasi-contracts, imuha nang ibalik because you cannot be unjustly enriched or benefited at the expense of another. Next, we have acts or omissions punished by law. These are obligations which arise from civil liability, which is the consequence of a criminal offense. So kung naa kay gipatay, a criminal liability is always coupled with a civil liability. Kay nakapatay man ka, kinahanglan nimo bayaran ang pamilya sa imong na patay nga tao. We have quasi-delicts. These are obligations which arise from damage caused to another through an act or omission, there being fault or negligence, but no contractual relation exists between the parties. So akong example ani last time is nagpabuhat ka og balay, 3-story, then dito sa ika-third floor habang nagapanda imong karpentero nahulog iyang martilyo, nahulugan ang namaligyang mangga sa ubos. Do you have the duty to bring na namaligya ay mangga, the vendor who was hit by the martilyo? Yes. That is what we call quasi-delict. Ang imong kakontrata si karpentero, wala man kay contract to protect that vendor, pero nahulugan man siya. Therefore, that is what we call quasi-delict. Law, contracts, quasi-contracts, acts or omissions punished by law, and quasi-delicts are discussed in the different provisions under obligations and contracts. So again, legal obligations, contract obligations, quasi-contract, civil liability, and obligations arising from quasi-delict are discussed in Article 1158, Article 1159, Article 1160, Article 1161, and Article 1162. Therefore, in our next lesson, we will discuss Article 1163. But before that, let us take a look at the best smartwatch in 2023. Now, when you hear the word smartwatch, a lot of brands will come into your mind, right? Kung mayon lang kog na ako'y smartwatch, it can be an iWatch, or a Xiaomi watch, or a Huawei watch, or even a Samsung watch. But in 2023, there are a lot of smartwatches that had been released in the market. So let us take a look at the 5 best smartwatches in 2023. Number 1 on the list is Samsung Galaxy Watch 5. And then we have Apple Watch Series 2. We also have the newly released Apple Watch Ultra. This is my iWatch Apple Watch 8 and Samsung Galaxy Watch 5 Pro. So, kung may pera na kayo, bili kayo ng isa sa mga best smartwatch in 2023. Now, let us go to Chapter 2, Nature and Effects of Obligations. Before we discuss each provisions, basahin muna natin sila. Let us start with Article 1163. What does this article say? Every person obliged to give something is also obliged to take care of it with the proper diligence of a good father of a family, unless the law or the stipulation of the party requires another standard of care. In this article, you remember determinate thing, indeterminate thing, and the diligence required. In Article 1164, it says, the creditor has a right to the fruits of the thing from the time the obligation to deliver it arises. However, he shall acquire no real right over it until the same has been delivered to him. Here, we will be talking about fruits, personal right, and real right. Article 1165. When what is to be delivered is a determinate thing, the creditor, in addition to the right granted him by Article 1170, may compel the debtor to make the delivery. If the thing is indeterminate or generic, he may ask that the obligation be complied with at the expense of the debtor. If the obligor delays or has promised to deliver the same thing to 2 or more persons who do not have the same interest, he shall be responsible for any fortuitous event until he has effected the delivery. Here we will be talking about remedies, delays, and What happens when you promise to two creditors the same thing? Before we move on to Article 1163, let us first discuss the types of real obligation. So karon you might be confused, ma'am, unsa man ang real obligation? Sige, we will first change the title. Instead of saying types of real obligation, we will call this types of things para mas dali mahinumduman. Types of real obligation or types of things include two different things. We have determinate or specific and indeterminate or generic. So again, since naglibog mo sa ang types of real obligation, ang atong gamiton are types of things. There are two types of things in civil law. We have determinate or specific and indeterminate or generic. Again, determinate and specific and indeterminate or generic. Types of things. Again, we have determinate or specific and indeterminate or generic. What is a determinate or a specific thing? A determinate or a specific thing is a thing particularly designated or physically segregated from all others of the same class. A determinate thing is identified by its individuality. So for example, kung maingon ko, I will only drink nature's spring water as my mineral water, I am talking about a determinate specific thing. Unsa man ang determinate specific thing nga akong ginainom lang, that is nature's spring mineral water. The debtor cannot substitute it with another, although the latter is of the same kind and quality without the consent of the creditor. Ma'am, nalibog na ko. Just wait a moment because I will explain this later by giving examples. Let us now move on to indeterminate or generic things. These are things designated merely by its class or genus. So pag mayin ko, I want to drink a mineral water, that means masking unsa nga mineral water ang akong pwede inumon. Pag mayin ko determinate, I only drink nature's spring mineral water, giunsa na ko siya, gisegregate na ko siya from all others of the same class. Pero pag mayin ko mo inom kog mineral water, any brand of mineral water ang akong ginainom. The debtor can give anything of the same class as long as it is of the same kind. Kung maingong ko day, hatagi ko og mineral water, therefore, pwede na ko nimo hatagan og distilled drinking water, Wilkins, pwede ko nimo hatagag refresh, or pwede po ko nimo hatagan og nature spring mineral water. A while ago, I gave you the list of the best smartwatch of 2023. Now, kung maingkog the best smartwatch in 2023, since 5 months sila kabuok, so kung mayon akong pahiramonti ka og 20,000 pero ang ibayad nimo sa ako kay best smartwatch in 2023, therefore, you can give me any of these 5 watches. This is what we call indeterminate or generic. Wala man ko nag-ingon og brand. So kung mangutang ka sa kog 20,000, maing ko, sige, bayari ko og best smartwatch. Therefore, you can give me any of these things. Pero pag moingon kog, sige, pahiramon ti kag 20,000 pero ang imong ibayad sa ako is Samsung Galaxy Watch 5 Pro, that is what we call determinate or specific. Nga naman, these 5 watches are all best smartwatches. Pero ang akong gusto is an individual separated from these kind, which is Samsung Galaxy Watch 5 Pro. That is what we call determinate specific thing. Kung moingon ko best smartwatch, wala ko nagstorya og brand, indeterminate na siya, generic. Pero pag moingon ko og bayari kog Samsung Galaxy Watch 5, that is determinate. Apple Watch SE determinate. Apple Watch Ultra determinate, and Apple Watch 8, that is a determinate or specific thing. Now let us take a look at these examples of indeterminate and determinate things. So indeterminate, ming ko nga, na ako'y baligya iro. Ningon akong friend, sige, mo palit ko anay mong iro. That is an indeterminate. Nganong indeterminate man? Because daghan man tag-klase-klase nga breed sa iro. Pero pag moingon ko, day na maligya ko og Dalmatian nga iro, that is a determinate thing. Nga naman, because it is a specific breed of dog. Another one, indeterminate cat. But if I tell you that I only want a Persian cat, that is a determinate thing. Kung moingon kog singsing, na maligya ko og singsing, then that can mean a lot of rings. But when I say a black diamond ring, that is a determinate thing. Again, let us go back to the different types of things. In here, I mentioned this one. The debtor cannot substitute it with another, although the latter is of the same kind and quality without the consent of the debtor. What if I told you that I only want a Dalmatian dog? However, nawala ang Dalmatian dog. Pwede ba nimo siya kambyuan o German Shepherd? Parehas naman sila iro. Pwede ba na? The answer is no. You cannot substitute my Dalmatian dog with another German Shepherd. Nga naman, it is a determinate thing. Mauman na ako ang gusto. Meaning, dili nimo na siya pwede kambyuhan kung wala ko ning sugot. Pero kung niingon ko nga, ang gusto na ko paliton Dalmatian dog. However, nawala man imong Dalmatian dog nakasibat sa balay. So niingon ka, day, ilisan na lang ti kag German Shepherd. Kung nisugot ko, okay. Pero kung wala ko nisugot, dili na siya pwede. Klaro? Let us go to another one. Dirita sa indeterminate or generic things. The debtor can give anything of the same class as long as it is of the same kind. So for example, niingon ko, day, na maligi ako bugas nga humay. Niingon ka sa kuha, sige ma'am mo, palit ko ana imong bugas nga humay. Bugas nga humay have different kinds and classes. Meron tayong kuhako, meron tayong 7-tanner, meron tayong banay-banay rice. They are the same humay rice. Parehas na sila. Karon ang akong baligya nga isa kasako nga bugas na basa sa ulan. Pwede ba ko muhatag sa imuha og maski unsa lang klase nga humay? The answer is yes, because it is indeterminate or generic. The debtor can give anything of the same class as long as it is of the same kind. Kanusa ni siya mahitabo? In case of loss of the thing due. Kung akong gidiman sa imuha relo nga Apple Watch Ultra, unya nawala nimo na, you cannot substitute it with another, although the latter is of the same kind and quality without my consent. Dili ka magpataka na lang og hato dito sa kuha og Samsung Galaxy Watch kung wala man day kuning sugot. However, in case of loss of the thing due of isa kasako nga bugas, the debtor can give me anything of the same class as long as it is of the same kind. Pwede ko nimo ilisan og kuhako, banay-banay rice, pero dili ko nimo pwede hatagan og mais, kay ang akong gipalit sa imuha humay man nga bugas, maski unsa nga brand. Okay, for you to understand, let us take a look at this. In indeterminate things, in case of loss of the thing due, the debtor can give anything of the same class as long as it is of the same kind. And in case of loss of the thing due indeterminate things, dirita sa specific things, the debtor cannot substitute it with another, although the latter is of the same kind and quality without the consent of the creditor. Na maligya kog iro. The word iro can mean a lot of things and different kinds of breeds. Okay? Kumain kog na maligya kog iring a cat. Akong isa ka iring na matay, can I substitute it with a different cat? Of course, because I am only saying na maligya ko og iring. I did not say a specific breed of cat. Kumain kog na maligya ako og singsing. Is there a particular kind of ring that I'm selling? Ingon man kog wala. Ingon ako na maligya kog singsing. Then, I can deliver to you any kinds of ring. Kung nawala man tong ring nga akong dapat ibaligya sa imuha. Okay? However, if I say, day na maligya kog Dalmatian nga iro, it is a determinate thing. Pwede ba nako siya ilisan og German Shepherd? No. Because the debtor cannot substitute it with another, although the latter is of the same kind and quality without the consent of the creditor. So, dili nimo siya pwede ilisan kung wala ka na nanghid sa creditor. Dahil na maligya ko Persian cat, namatay si Persian cat, pwede ba nako siya hatagan og Bisaya nga iring? Dili pwede. Kailangan nang imong ihatag si Persian cat lang gihapon. Dahil na maligya ko black diamond ring. However, nawala na ako paglaban ako. Hatagan lang tika og diamond ring, pwede ba? Dili pwede. Because you promised a determinate thing. Without the consent of the creditor, you cannot just substitute it with another, although the latter is of the same kind and quality. Dili nimo siya pwede ilisan. Ma'am, kanusan ako siya pwede ilisan? Kung nisugot si creditor.